discovering something brand new.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Elena, and good afternoon, everyone. The executives I'm about to call up are really another group of seasoned business disruptors who really know what it takes to accelerate growth. And when we're talking about growing your business, it's really two things. You need to really accept some really tough choices and also be willing to accept some discomfort to grow that business. And these three panelists exactly do that. So it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage our esteemed panel. They've given us, quote unquote, permission to pick at their brains for the next 45 minutes. And I'd like to call them up right now. So I'd like to call up Robert Masson, Chief Financial Officer from Sleep Country, Michelle Romanoff, Dragon from CBC's Dragon's Den, who's also the co-founder and president of Clearbank, and Sam Seif, President CEO of Purpose Investments. Got a little tune for you guys. You gotta walk slower. There you go. Welcome to the stage. Sam, thank you so much. Michelle, thank you. Okay, thanks you again, both Rob, Sam, and Michelle. Help yourself to some water, of course. And we're very, very, very fortunate to have these guests with us today. And we expect this conversation to be quite a lively one at a very quick pace. So we encourage debate. And so we picked these three for a very particular reason, because of very different backgrounds. And that's what we wanted to bring to you, some very diverse conversation here. But before we get to it, Elena had mentioned that there are bios in the app. And so you can read those on your own time. But we just thought we'd do things a little bit different and go a little deeper beyond those bios and kind of turn back the clock to the panelists' childhood. And so when you think of children, they're usually they're described as very curious and also very fearless. And that's how I'd characterize all three of you. So I'm going to pose our first question to you as a bit of an intro. In terms of kind of when you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up? So I'm going to turn over to Rob, because I'm going to throw you on the spot here.
Sure.
Rob.
So I was born in South Africa, and as an 8-year-old boy, I wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps. He was working for one of the big banks in South Africa, so I knew I wanted to go into the business world. It wasn't any more precise than that, but I've really followed that dream through to now being involved in a retail company.
I wanted to be an architect, and I love the creative element of things. I always wanted to build something, and I felt like houses and things like that would be cool, buildings. But it actually is very important. I decided I didn't go into that field mainly because of money, unfortunately. Many architects have told me that you'll have a miserable existence being an architect, so I decided to go into engineering and pursue business, which I don't know which one is more miserable. But what I'd say is that the creative element of things is very important. I think actually one of the things that we learn in business is that creativity and business are hand in hand, and I think it's so critical to the way you have to think as a leader today. I think that I encourage my own kids now to be very much engaged in creative elements, because I think that's going to be, no matter what they do in the future, one of the most important factors in their success.
Fantastic. And Michelle, your thoughts?
I don't actually remember exactly what I wanted to be, but I remember figuring out from an early age that if I wanted to do things my way, or in a disruptive way, or in a different way than the rule book, I was going to have to do that myself. And so there was just a bunch of those experiences. I was also like Sam, I ended up in first-year engineering, and I was like, oh man, I'm going to be way better at building businesses than bridges. So started kind of early in my career. But I'm happy I get to live in a world where my options weren't kind of secretary or school teacher. And so it's been really fun to be
So
that
professional
disruptor.
rule breaker is what we'll call you. Okay, that's what Michelle wanted to be when growing up. And this panel is all about accelerating growth. And kind of with that, it does mean different things to different people. Some would say that they stay away from it, but it's actually a path that we ultimately need to go down if you want to be successful. So I wanted to kind of gear these first couple questions to Rob and Sam, in terms of kind of how do you look at and define growth in terms of your businesses? But in particular, Rob, I'm going to start with you with Sleep Country, because Sleep Country just recently fairly recently last year, did an IPO. And some, would consider Sleep Country a sleepy company, right? But that's anything but the truth. So just maybe you can just tell the audience and share with the audience kind of how you at Sleep Country define growth and how that's helped you accelerate the growth within your business.
Thank you. So I joined Sleep Country in 2013, and quickly realized that retailing is really not a sleepy business. And so in terms of Sleep Country, we are a retail company, and we focus really on top-line growth and hopefully try and achieve also a good EBITDA margin as well. So in terms of our top-line growth, we focus on opening up new stores. We've opened up about 10 stores per year over the last 8 or 9 years, and it's been a really good pace for us. But more importantly, we focus on organic growth or same-store sales growth, and that's comparing the same group of stores that existed 12 months ago. And so that's been a tremendous success for us. We've had 15 consecutive quarters of same-store sales growth in a retail world that is being disrupted today. And that, it really points to a couple of key factors that we focused on. Number one is we focus on driving traffic into our stores, and that's through marketing and advertising. And we've really focused a lot on that over the last couple of years, and particularly in 2013, where we increased our spend about 29%. We hired a new advertising agency, and then since then, we've continued to layer on new investment in that area. And so that's really been what's driven our success over the last couple of quarters as a public company.
Great, and for any of you that have young children here, and you talk about customer experience, if you ever walk by a Sleep Country store, you'll actually see the kids bouncing from mattress to mattress, and I actually understand in your store that's actually strongly encouraged.
Yes, it is.
So if you do have children and you're lacking a park in your neighborhood, you can go to Sleep Country to drive that customer traffic. Now, moving on to Sam with Purpose Investments. So you're defining growth with your strategy. You've really pivoted that organization to accelerated heights. Can you talk a little bit about what growth means to Purpose Investments?
So I mean, look, there's traditional ways of thinking about growth, which are your business metrics of revenue and assets and all the things in our industry. I look at it a little bit differently, and the way I sort of, first, we're a very high performance, high growth type of organization, the way that the culture that we've set. And what we think a lot about are one, the progress that our people are making in their own personal roles, and if my people are ultimately driving themselves and trying to be more and more ambitious in terms of where they want to be and what they represent, then my organization as a whole will grow accordingly. Two is I constantly think a lot about the ways that we are relevant in the marketplace, and for the industry itself, how do we play a role in not only participating but changing and driving change within the industry. So our growth initiatives and how they will ultimately lead to the industry being better and practicing better over the long run. And then three is what I think a lot about is, and this is the message I continue to instill in our firm is, there are really great businesses that grow very well, but I don't look at the celebration of growth as being the priority. I think of things based on opportunity, and I try to drive my team to constantly look at the business from what is our opportunity set. Because, for example, let's say building an asset management company, and we could go out and build a $2-3 billion business in terms of asset management, and for the most part, that's a growth company. It would be successful in most people's eyes. But if our opportunity was to create a $10 billion asset management firm, then we failed. And so I kind of keep driving people to never sort of be comfortable, never be willing to settle on saying, hey, we're doing okay or we're doing well in the eyes of others. Do well in the eyes of what your ambitions are and what you believe is your opportunity. And if you have that mindset, you'll always be striving for more.
Right. You'll always hear those two words together, discomfort and growth.
That's right.
Without that discomfort, you don't have that growth. So, and I like the way you put the people piece first, right? You need to have that individual growth.
We're a people's business. And in the end of the day, the assets we have are our people and our culture. And if we don't do a good job of driving them as individuals, one of my most proud things about my first business, Claymore, was that after the business, one of the fastest growing asset management companies in this country, we sold it to BlackRock, and when I stepped away and I thought a little bit about what we did, and shareholders made a lot of money, I didn't care. What I cared about was every single person who came through that company left the company in a much better place from a personal perspective, career perspective, and that to me was my best hallmark, I'd say, as an individual.
Building their personal balance sheet. That's fantastic. So now we're going to turn a little bit to Michelle, because she's been a little quiet, and as you know, Michelle's not quiet, so we're going to get her talking here. So Michelle, I understand your motto is, successful people do what unsuccessful people are not willing to do. And so, in terms of what were you willing to do, in terms of growing your business, that you don't see other people doing? What is that?
I think so for those of you that don't know my story, I started very early. My first business was in undergrad. My second business was a caviar fishery where we moved out to New Brunswick. I knew nothing about fish. I had grown up in an oil and gas family. This was totally, and we figured out, the whole 9 yards, boat, fisherman, license, processing facility. And caviar was extraordinarily valuable. Worldwide supply was down by 95%, and so we had found this actually really magical niche within the market. But so much of that was, most people would have said, like, there's no way I'm doing that. Like, I processed fish myself. I bought a fishing boat myself. Like, I figured out so many of these little pieces. And I say I, but it was really the three of us as co-founders that did that. And I think that like grittiness and that scrappiness and that willingness and wanting to constantly be talking to your customer was so critical in what happened later. And so, 3 years later when we started Bytopia, we certainly weren't the first daily deal site. We were something like the 18th player in the space. We had, 24 companies that were funded. Groupon had almost raised at this point $1 billion. Like, it was crazy. And our whole competitive advantage was, cheaper customer acquisition. And we said, well, if we hadn't raised money, if I spend $5,000 on advertising today, I need to make $10,000 tomorrow at a $50,000 or a 50% margin. And it's crazy how that one skill, it just served me in so many different ways. And so now, we're in the banking space, and the whole goal is to get customers, and now the ability to know how to find and acquire them cheaper has been an extraordinary advantage. For the companies that I've built off Dragon's Den, I have a few e-commerce companies, one that's a fingerprint padlock, and their whole growth has been fueled by how to get more and more customers at lower cost. And I don't think I ever would have learned that skill if we had raised funding in the early days. I think that was something that I've grown with that's been extraordinarily helpful in growing a bunch of different things.
And I hear the word curious. You're very curious. If you've gone into that many different businesses at such a young age, you're a curious young lady.
Curious and crazy.
And crazy. You said it first. Okay, so now I'm going to turn a little bit to our next question, and then we're going to get to a polling question to bring you guys into the conversation. So Rob, Michelle, and Sam, this kind of goes out to all of you. How can a company determine the right recipe for accelerating growth? Or is there even a right recipe for accelerating growth? Any views on that?
Well, I don't think there's a recipe per se. I think everybody has their own sort of things, but I think there's some key elements and characteristics that are pretty consistent. So look, anyone who, if you've sailed or you've run or you cycle or anything like that, the most important thing is you don't run into the wind. And so when you want to be in the growth space, the priorities always are look for the opportunities that have a little bit of a tailwind opportunity within them. It doesn't mean to be that you just jump in and be number 18, because that's hard too. But find the areas where you think that you're not challenged in terms of building a business in the face of everyone else not caring, right? That's a really important thing. The number of companies that come to market with great ideas, but ultimately no one ultimately cares is really powerful, really an issue, and we see it all the time. So get in a good tailwind. That will help you with as you're building it. You always have a little bit of rising tide. Hopefully it lifts some boats, and then ultimately you can drive your acceleration within that. I think too is it goes back to my comment earlier about talent and people. There is not enough cliches around the quality of people that are around the table to help support the thinking, the curiosity, and the passion that goes into building a growth organization. And this is the type of place where having the right securities as an individual when you're the leader, and meaning not insecurities, and two is hiring the phenomenal talent around you to help you carry the load as much as possible. And so A-type players as much as possible, not B and C's. This is a huge opportunity when you hire really phenomenal talents. And I think three is in making sure that when you're building your business, you're creating that, call it incentive thinking. And I'm not talking about incentive in terms of pay, I'm talking about incentive thinking. The types of environment where people are taught to fail fast, to be willing to be challenged and challenge others, to be open-minded to the things that are really critical. Those things drive people to think and act, and you get those talented individuals to do some amazing things. I think those characteristics are pretty common. Now, there's a whole bunch of other elements to great successes, but those things I think consistently will make for a great organization opportunity.
Right, and there's opportunities in different things. Like, there's the obvious things everyone's gravitating, like fintech, everybody's running, robotics, everybody's running. But then there's also those small little niches, and so that's why we wanted to kind of hear a little bit from Rob with his business. And a good example of that would be Jay Klein. For those of you that know Jay Klein from Pure Gum, like, he created a market, and if you go into a health food store, you'll see his product. He's now into mints, and it's all aspartame. Like, who would have thought that gum was a market that you could go into? And he created that space. So space can be small and space can be big. What does it look like at Sleep Country when you look at yourself? Is there that recipe? Is there that space? How do you view it, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, we experienced that with, as we started going into the sleep accessory business, and we were traditionally known as a mattress company, and people didn't really think about us in terms of pillows or sheets or duvets. And so one of our chief business development officers had an idea about growing this category, and so he had the vision in place, but it really was a real teamwork. And the first objective was to get the sales team behind it, because they were used to a customer coming in and they would sell them $1,000 mattress and make a nice commission out of that, and now they're being asked to sell a $50 pillow, and obviously it could take just as much time to sell a pillow as a mattress, and so they weren't really that keen to engage in that. But we went through a lot of training, and eventually they realized that there was a niche in the market about having good quality sleep accessories, and so it kind of gained traction. And since 2012, we've had a compound growth rate of 16% in that category, and that's all behind having a great sales team, a great experience in store. We've focused on having dedicated advertising towards that, towards pillows, and as an example, which has brought in great customers for that as well. And so I think that's really a recipe that's worked well for us. And I think it all goes back down to people as well. We very much agree with that. And we focus a lot on training at Sleep Country. And most sales associates, when they start with us, have to go through an 8-week training program, which really is unheard of in the retail industry. You normally just get thrown onto the floor and expected to sell a product. And we focus on training, which I think is a recipe for us.
Not to badmouth Canadian Tire, but my son just started a job 2 weeks ago, and he got 45 minutes of training, so don't go near the Etobicoke store. No, but on a serious note, I think, Rob, that's really interesting, 16%. So for the non-retailers in that in the room, that's quite incredible. Usually in retail, you're talking 2-3% max. Maybe at the holiday season, if you're lucky, you might tip over that, but it's a hard, aggressive industry. So
why has there been so much excitement in the mattress industry? Yeah. It's literally like no one was talking about it. Eve's going public, Casper's a thing. Like, what happened in the last couple years that everyone got excited about mattresses all over again?
I think it was a very sleepy business, and then obviously Casper is great at marketing, and they came up with a product which frankly is not a new product. It's been around for about 10 years, but I think the whole convenience factor became all of a sudden very prominent in customers' minds. I mean, you think of Uber, everybody wants to know where the cab is, how long is it going to get to where they are, and how long it's going to take to get to their house. So the same thing with I think mattress in a box. It's just about that convenience factor, and you want to be able to order it when you're in your pajamas at home and have it delivered when it suits you. And I think that's really what's caught on fire.
And you literally mean mattress in a box. Like, I've seen it at your head office. It is in a box. You can carry it out.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of need two people. It's, unless you're very strong like Sam.
And Michelle, you being on Dragon's Den, you see them come in, you see them come out. Mm-hmm. And so, you just talked in your last response about crunching numbers. Mm-hmm. And so is there that recipe, is that number analysis, what is it behind it when you're analyzing companies that come onto your show?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest, and this is kind of a tech startup bias, but what's happens a lot is that people are looking for growth and they're overfunding that growth in a giant attempt to make a land grab, which is a very specific strategy that I think you can use in some places. I think it's a lot harder. I think for me, it's always about, am I running experiments at real prices, so I'm actually getting the right litmus test. And so the common thing that startups do is, okay, we got this great product, we're going to discount it, give it away for free, basically give out $1 bills for 65 cents and see if anyone's interested. And what happens is a lot of people are interested in $1 bills for 65 cents. And so you can get this massive growth curve. And then at some point, your VC funding starts to drop. Something happens where you have to say, okay, now we have to charge $1.25 for our $1 bills because we're adding some value to them. And does anyone want these? And that's where I think we've seen a pretty big shift in what we're doing. And so I think especially for Canadian companies, and at least for my own companies, I never wanted to sit in that spot where we were saying, well, do people really want this at the price we need to charge for them to want that? And I think that getting that right in the early days means that when you pour fuel on the fire and you're accelerating, positive margins, you can keep doing that.
Yeah. So really quickly, yes, no, recipe for accelerated growth? Yes, no.
In terms of?
Is there a recipe for accelerated growth? Yes, no.
Very much so.
Yes.
I think there's key factors.
Safe answer, Sam.
I think there's key factors of success, and that's it. And I couldn't agree more with this. I think there's so many, we are in a very unique environment right now where growth-based equity, capital that will fund growth at a certain type, in certain industries, not broadly, but in certain areas, is very patient and is out there, and it's giving a lot of people this kind of called latitude. But I think that in the end of the day, any business that wants to have a growth model, wants to drive it, they've got to have a true P&L that actually makes logical sense. You can try, test, and do unique things to acquire customers, but in the end of the day, if you don't have a true P&L that makes profitable sense over the long run, you don't have a profitable EV, enterprise value. And so, there is lots of patient capital out there, but that capital will get less patient if you can't solve that EV for that growth model. And I just think it's a unique time in our world right now, and I think a lot of people have a lot of new entrepreneurs have become very complacent with that patient capital. I'm dealing with one right now where I'm on the board of a business, and the original founders are effectively being wiped out, unfortunately, from their business. And they're complaining and they're complaining, and it comes down to one simple thing: they gave up control to a capital partner who was very patient, and they didn't deliver. At the end of the day, they lost control of their business. And I just think that's ultimately, if you want to grow, you want to be successful, you just got to keep delivering. If you deliver, then people around you will always give you everything you need.
Yeah, execute. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to engage this audience here. The greatest thing being on second is the polling's going to work, right? Because we've got the kinks out. So hopefully everyone has their phone with you, and we can get you right into the app. So just dial in onto the EY events, and you will see our next polling question. So this is all about whatever the business, there's either disruptors and the disrupted. And typically it's those newcomers that are the disruptive. And usually the disrupted are often those large organizations or the ones that are more established in the marketplace. So this question here, we wanted to kind of get your views on what you think those key drivers are. So what do you believe are the key drivers of disruption across industries? And so there's kind of the obvious one you may gravitate to, but I really challenge you to kind of read all four of them, and I'll help you guys out because I know you can't see the screen on what the audience does poll to. And so there's four options in terms of the disruption. Is it technology? Is it regulatory changes? Is it the change in customer behaviors and wants? Or is it the social media aspect? So again, we're looking at what do you think the primary driver of disruption is across all industries. So we'll just give you a few minutes, or 1 minute. We're all quick on our phones usually. All right, so just to help out our panelists here, and I have very bad eyesight, but it looks like number one, technology change is kind of the sure bet winner, and then a close second is changing customers' behaviors and wants. And what's kind of equal on the third least choice there would be regulatory changes in social media. So does that surprise you? Like, technology seems like an obvious answer, but is it really technology?
I think all of it's safe answers. And it's easy to sort of look in the mirror and say, oh, technology disrupted us, or the regulators disrupted us. I think the single answer of disruption is yourself. You didn't pay attention to what was happening around you. You didn't listen to your customers. You didn't invest in the technology that was ultimately evolving. Technology is a constantly evolving thing. I mean, think of like the simplest concepts of like a laptop. Like, how has it evolved? In all this time. If you don't think the technology is evolving, you better be investing in it. If you're using archaic technology from 20 years ago or 15 years ago, you're going to be disrupted. And then regulatory changes happen. I mean, not every industry is regulated, but I'd say that for those that are, it's going to change and happen. You have to be prepared for it. But But in the end of the day, the common factor in all that is you. And you are the one who caused the disruption, if you, or let yourself be disrupted. And I think that a great example is what's happening in the grocery industry with this Whole Foods acquisition by Amazon. All these people are crying foul. At the end of the day, for 10, 15 years, all these grocers could have dealt with it themselves, created their own delivery model, been in the middle of all this opportunity. And now they've let Amazon basically come in and put them out of business ultimately over the long run, or squeeze them so that their P&L is going to get squeezed badly. And I just look at it, it's their own fault. No one else's fault except for themselves. And you know, I just,
and
you
it's
have
so
to
funny. It always happens with someone else underestimating something.
Yep,
it's
that's
like
right.
the iPhone. That's a kid's tool. That's
Yeah.
for cartoons. Adults will never use that.
Yeah.
That was the original reaction to the iPhone.
Well, Mark Andreessen always says, he's the best comment, he goes, well, people overestimate what will happen in the next 2 years and underestimate what will happen in the next 10 years, and I think that absolutely is correct. You know, you have to be thoughtful about this. And I actually like the paranoia of saying something's going to change really aggressively in the next 2 years, because then it'll maybe help you accelerate your own perspective of how to be a part of that.
Up your game. Michelle, your thoughts on disruption in terms of, like, you look at your company, what your company's doing about it. You've got now, what, in your 4th company? I don't know, I get so lost in how many companies you've had. So.
Well, no, I agree with Sam. It's ultimately here, and the biggest thing is it's impossible to see what's the perfect storm when you're standing right here. Like, I always had such a problem with, you know, this idea of like blue ocean strategy. It's like, oh, just go find the blue ocean. It's like, it's impossible to see what the blue ocean is here. It might be red, it might be green, and it's only until you look back that you could see what a big opportunity is. And that's why the paranoia matters, right? I mean, there's so many good examples of this. I look at, you know, the Groupon story, this fundamental idea that you could unite buyers together, lower the cost of something, was something that Steve Ballmer tried to start almost 4 years before Groupon started. And he like, same idea, but there wasn't the right storm around the Facebook news feed, about 24-hour news cycles, to actually get critical buyers in a small enough time period. And the whole idea didn't work. Mm-hmm. The identical idea comes out 4 years later, slightly different team, and then it accelerates.
And so why is that though? Why
because
did it work the second time?
It's this combination of a million different pieces of timing, customer expectations, willingness, where demographics are. Like, I look at a lot of the shift in the fintechs, and I think there's a lot of things to point to, right? Some of it is just, you know, your example earlier of like, everyone expects everything to be Uberized, right? Mm-hmm. We expect to be like, you know, it's like I called my bank yesterday and it took me a 28-minute phone call to change the PIN card on a credit card number that I didn't request a PIN card for. Like, every customer now knows that that's not good. Yeah. Like, there's just the general, we have set the expectation of, you want a taxi, this is a one click on your phone, and I think that a lot of what's shifted in fintech, it's like, well, I know ACH goes through the Fed every night, and that was always the way we transferred money, but like, that takes 2 business days. Like, that's crazy. Why? And so it's that storm of everything. It's technology, it's customer expectations, and that's why it's important to be paranoid as an entrepreneur, because you actually kind of never know which of those wins it's going to be.
And I think in the retail industry, I think there has been a lot of complacency. I mean, you have these huge companies that have got these legacy IT systems that they've bolted different applications on over time, and then to make a change or add e-commerce, things like that, becomes overly difficult. And then you get a startup company that doesn't have the baggage, and all of a sudden they've got the latest. They've got RFID, they've got you know, great shipping technology and all that thing that just is out of the box for them. And it takes, you know, some retail companies 3 or 4 years to implement something like that. So I think that complacency eventually catches up, and then eventually it becomes too late, and then they go under.
I think that one of the biggest factors to that is that when a company starts to move in from, call it growth territory to cash flow territory, what is that they're managing for margins, that's what kills a business, in my opinion. Because, you know, the minute you start saying, I'm going to set a shareholder margin that I'm trying to hit, mm-hmm. Then you're now trying to run your business and making decisions between shareholders and growth. And you see it consistently. You know, that's when they start to use balance sheet to start to acquire businesses, which is a tricky thing, as opposed to R&D and expenditures. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, the minute you stop, call it, investing in the business in that way, I think you've got to really dig down deep and ask yourself if you're doing the right thing. Again, going back to the Amazon situation, why Amazon is so successful as an organization, it's got the most patient shareholders as a public company. And it's actually, they have allowed the leader to sit there and, you know, forget about cash flows and margins as a public business and still have that capital that will give them the high value multiple to be able to go do unique things and test and experiment and so on and so forth. And that's why, you know, they've been so successful. If they didn't have patient shareholders, they would be out of business today, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, even we get caught up in that. I mean, now that we're a public company, you know, when we went through our IPO, we had an EBITDA margin of about 14%, and everybody was asking us, you know, can you ever get to 15? And then now we're at 16. But, you know, if we keep on just wanting to grow that EBITDA margin, then you may not make decisions to continue to grow the company. And so we'd rather grow the top line faster and in fact actually have a slight decline in EBITDA margin because, again, otherwise you become complacent and make the wrong decisions.
Well, and I would say this is exactly the entrepreneur's opportunity. For everybody in the room who is an entrepreneur thinking about how to attack a market, you know, that right there is your dilemma. You've got a bunch of big companies that are thinking about EBITDA, and why they can then disrupt or challenge or do the things they're doing is because they know that they can't really be nimble enough on the investment side to attack you. Now they've got big and they've got scale and all the things in distribution, but you can usually build something within that is very successful, and then they'll come and buy you because they'll use capital as opposed to their P&L to buy you, and that's what you see it consistently. The entrepreneur's opportunity.
Yeah, yet they had their tentacles out, right? Like I remember doing a panel and we had Loblaws up front, and we did this kind of rapid fire up front. We brought some entrepreneurs in the front and we met them in the Entrepreneur Society in various places, and we did a 2-minute rapid fire. They could do their pitch for 2 minutes, literally had a clock, and we took them off the stage. And then we continued on with the panel, and one of the panelists was Loblaws, and he leaned over to me and he said, he was a senior exec, he goes, "Where did you find these companies, Paul?" I go, "Well, we find them from the Entrepreneurial Society and various places." I go, "Why do you ask?" He goes, "Because we're talking to every single one of those companies you just put on the stage." So I agree with you, Sam, like there is a huge opportunity, but they're not sleeping at the wheel, they're just trying to figure out how to do it at the same time. So I thought that was very interesting, but they move slow. To your point, they move very slow, and there's that advantage. When you're small, you can be much more nimble. So now I'm going to try to talk a little bit about managing risk, because we've all talked about, well, we can be curious, and we can kind of disrupt, and let's disrupt ourselves. But at the end of the day, you also have to manage that risk. And so my next question is really around how do companies really manage that risk at the same time as trying to accelerate growth? Like, is there a way to do it? How do you look at it? Just kind of get some views from the three of you. It's a hard question.
If I think about risk, I wouldn't go to work every day. I have to avoid it. You know, my mind is in many ways. Look, I think that.
Is there an acceptable level of risk that you have, Sean?
I think you have to be a risk taker if you're willing to go and build and be thoughtful. And risk is, you know, everything from, you know, the concept of fail fast and all the things like that, experimentation, willingness to sort of, you know, fearless innovation, all that kind of stuff is really critical. And I said that outset, you know, if you build the environment for people to be willing to take risks, you know, smart risks, and I say that, you know, it's very intelligent, you got to have thoughtful, communicative risks. The thing that I've found to be the most important factor, again, I go back to my factors, in an environment that is willing to take risks is that they are open-minded people. And so why is this important? Because you know, the most important thing or most consistent thing we see in failure is hubris. And that is that when someone believes that they're right, regardless of what the market is telling them or people around them are telling them. And so if you're open-minded as a leader or as an individual, you can take risks because you can be willing to fail quickly and recognize that you're failing and turn it around and move on. Yeah. It's the people who just keep going down and pushing, and then ultimately, you know, it hurts them. And that's why I sort of see the willingness to take risk has to be an environment with people that understand that they may be wrong.
I mean, even from a personal situation, my son plays competitive soccer, and he was having a feedback session with his coach, and the coach was telling him, you know, "Thomas, you need to spill the milk occasionally. Like, you can't just be conservative on the soccer field. You have to spill the milk and take chances. And sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not. And so I think we have to take that lesson into business and learn to sometimes, you know, take risks, calculated risks. But if you don't take risks, then you can't grow as a company."
We have an experimentation framework at Clearbank where I always have, you know, 2 or 3 people doing projects that are kind of unrelated, that are experiments we're trying, and they feel like first of all, I trust them, but they feel actually very empowered to deliver something. And there's actually lots of really good people that can do this because they're ex-founders or they're people that have been this before. But it's unbelievable, some of the things that have happened in my career from just these tiny little experiments. And it's hard to experiment, it's hard to take risks because there is always that option of failure. And so I think it's always about putting those people in a place where it's like, look, my expectation is 80% of this isn't gonna work, but we're trying these 3 ideas with the belief that they're all gonna work, but moving very quickly through them. To figure it out, and we've figured out a lot of things by actually putting those ideas into a practice and a framework, so we can keep finding those growth areas or those new verticals.
And you're saying they're like founders of businesses, like they're like, what type of people are doing this for you?
They're like, exactly. They're people that I trust, that are typically ex-entrepreneurs or ex-founders or did a business, it didn't work, so they want a slightly more structured system where it's not just totally on their own. But they've been amazing.
Yeah. That's I've never heard it described that way. You hear about incubators, but you actually bring these people together and do what they love, right?
Yeah, and I mean, they're totally related. It's like, we're exploring another vertical within Clearbank of a different, customer group we want to go after, but it's a totally different way to acquire those and they're kind of responsible from top to bottom of that, and that's worked really well. And our typical structure is one kind of business operation every one person and one person that can build technology to support that. And it seems really small and it's usually really inexpensive to run, but between those two you can actually get an extraordinary amount done.
That's very interesting. And I think, moving to our next question now, we've got a couple more here. We would then want to kind of like open it up in a bit of a unique way to kind of get a polling of what the audience wants to talk about next. Want to get a sense of kind of your best decision and worst decision that you've made in your kind of role as entrepreneurs, executives within your organization. I know there's highs and lows, but is there one that kind of really sticks out to you? You can either go on the positive side or on the other side.
I mean, my best decision was leaving the Royal Bank.
There's the Royal Bank right there.
All Royal Bank hands. Can you grow up?
No, and I don't mean that as a flaw. I just think it was more. I'm not a very employable person, and I don't think I would have survived there long term if I'd stayed. Look, I mean, I think we make lots of bad decisions. I will tell you that I'm pretty I think the average of a normal human is that you make about 48% bad decisions and 52 good decisions, and it's sort of like that's the weighting, and it's the people who can make 52 or 53% good decisions versus 49% good decisions, you're actually going to be successful, and that's the way it sort of works out, I think. I think it's that often, and so we make a lot of bad decisions, and as I said earlier, I think the biggest thing that we do well is that we are very open-minded to the fact that we will be wrong, and we're willing to change course and it's actually a principle that I talk to my team about a lot is I'd rather make 10 decisions and sort of have sort of 5 successes out of that than have make 4 decisions and miss one great opportunity, because that's the way we need to think as an organization, because that one big opportunity is meaningful, and we'll reverse those 4 or 5 bad decisions quickly if we make them.
Right, so. But you uncover that one good one, that good
nugget. That good one. And that fear of making loss is what we'll miss out on that 5th great opportunity. So,
yeah, for me, I think my best decision was moving to Canada. I mean, I was in my late 20s, and my wife and I decided to emigrate from South Africa, and we chose Canada. And I think it's opened up so many opportunities for us. And sometimes when you think back, you don't realize really what you were doing at the time, and. But yeah, it's been great, and just in terms of worst decisions, I think it's all about learning from your mistakes. That if you have made a bad decision, you own it, and try and reflect on what you could have done better in terms of the future. And I think that's the key with if you do make a bad decision.
Mm-hmm. Michelle.
Yeah, I think it was very similar to Tom. It was like learning to move from. I think academia puts you in the space that is all about planning and needing to have all of the data. I mean, opportunities, like by the time McKinsey's writing about an opportunity, there's 40 players in the space. It's really opaque as you're the entrepreneur being like, there's like a bunch of different things swirling around. And I think it was, the best decisions are always when I had zero visibility and I'm like, we're gonna start experimenting. And none of this works, we'll kind of fix it as we go along and we'll find an opportunity within this. And that's been, and every single time people are looking, and we do ourselves such a disservice as a society because we ask people for eureka moments. We're like, what was that moment when you had the idea for Claymore and it was so differentiated and like, where, and at the time you're probably it didn't really
Doesn't make sense.
It didn't really feel, it only looks like eureka, it only looks like a blue ocean in reverse. And so I think that's part of just explaining that to entrepreneurs and understanding that it's not supposed to feel like you have a perfect plan and a perfectly baked out idea. And I mean, even some of my team struggles with this. They're like, well, Michelle, it's like, you know, the vision has changed and we're doing slightly different things. And I'm like, guys, this is the journey we're on. Like it's going to change and it's going to be malleable. And you know, part of being an entrepreneur is just getting really uncomfortable with that level of certainty.
Just looking for that word, uncomfortable.
And just being comfortable.
You're uncomfortable?
With
That's
being
good.
Uncomfortable. Exactly.
But I think the really important thing there is that you have to think. If you don't think, you know, you're not, or think for yourself about the opportunities around you, you're never going to solve it. Like having, so many big businesses have consultants come in and tell them where they should be thinking. And it's like, your people know the answers better than a consultant does. By the time, as you say, by the time,
sometimes
yeah,
know
the
the answer
customer
before
knows the
you
answers. By the time the consultant knows the answer, there's 50 other people that have already solved it or are in the middle of it, and you're likely, you know, way behind. And so, you know, if you want to be a truly thoughtful, innovative kind of organization, you just got to drive your people to give you the answers and then listen to what they're saying, and then you know, push them to think. And if they think, I promise you, you will have powerfulness. I believe in the resilience of people. I believe that you know, people are amazing if you really drive them and create the environment around them, and they will give you all the answers, and they'll lead you in all the directions you want them to lead you to if you just give them the opportunity to do so.
So all three of you
I think
really,
part of that is making sure you hire enough people, because if you're just focused on day-to-day activities, you don't have time to think. And so I think particularly in a fast-growing company, if you don't reinvest and add more people where necessary, then you get caught in just doing the daily grind.
That's why we have a 26-hour clock in our office.
entrepreneurs.
and it's also, you know, something really good. It's are you as a leader willing to listen? And I think one of my favorite tactics that I've learned is that when you're talking to someone, it's actually so easy to answer your own questions, right? You're like, okay, I think we should do this, and what do you think of this? Well, and you just like that pause when you're like. And even as a leader, sometimes you sound like such an idiot asking, because you already have 18 preconceived notions on the answer to this question. Like, what are we doing wrong? Like, okay, how many hours do you have? And I think that's like, when we talk about getting feedback from the people in our organizations, it is this art of asking and not answering your own question and truly leaving like a 5-minute pause to really get something out of someone, because we keep feeding our own biases, which is a horrible thing for an innovator to do.
You already answered my next question, which was like, how do you have time to think about this? Like, do you take time each day? Do you take time like on Friday and you get the group together? But really, it's you have an idea, you stop, you pause, you listen, and just it's like a deliberate, learned skill as a leader. Very nice. So now we're going to turn around a little bit. I'm going to ask one question to Sam, because I would just be amiss if I didn't ask this. You know, Sam, I know you serve on the board of Next Canada, and EY is a proud sponsor of Next Canada. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing with that organization and just how they're being a catalyst? Like I'm not sure how many people in this room know about Next Canada, but it's such an important thing. I wanted to make sure I gave you a bit of airtime on that.
So as an entrepreneur, so Next Canada is an unbelievable group. You might know it from the moniker of Next 36, which was originally the program that was, call it an educational program for taking university students and giving them an educational platform to kind of incubate their ideas into businesses, and you know, if the businesses flourish, then fantastic. But for most of the part, it was really about this educational journey. You know, what it has turned into has been this unbelievable opportunity organization. So, you know, one is, you know, Next 36 itself has, I'd say, incubated some of Canada's great entrepreneurs. There was a Toronto Life magazine article about 5 months ago, talked about the 20 top tech people. I think 11 or 12 of the tech heads were Next 36 alumnus. So really quite amazing, the talent it's been able to incubate and create and call it give them that spirit and the confidence to take what they do and do something with it, whether it's the idea they incubated at Next 36 or onwards. But it's now evolved into this really amazing organization. They're doing Next AI, Next Founders, and it's really about creating an ecosystem, and I hate that word, but an ecosystem that is about entrepreneurship. And it's what Americans, I think, have done so well. It's driving people to imagine and dream, and then giving them the tools and the skills and the network to basically go and execute. And I think that's what Next Canada has been a part of. It's something I've been a part of pretty much within year 2 of the program, and I can't tell you, my wife and I have been supporters of it. I've been on the board. Just so amazing, not only from seeing what it's done, but also from an individual perspective. I love being around these individuals because I'm learning every day. I'm the most curious person, and I'm constantly wanting to learn about interesting ideas, but also the energy. I feel like I'm a high energy person, but I walk in a room with some of these people and I walk out like, oh, you know that feeling when you go to New York sometimes and you're like, oh, I'm not doing enough. That's what you get. That's what you get from being around these individuals. And so, and I'd encourage everybody, if you have a chance, go, get into some of these. They have groups that they present the different stories. Go meet some of the different companies and individuals. These are going to be the future leaders of our country in many ways, and the businesses within our country over the next 30, 40 years. And then, figure out how you can get engaged because there's some really awesome things happening.
Fantastic organization. It could even potentially be an incubator for one of your companies down the road. Who knows? But I know we just have a short period of time left, but I did promise you that we just do one quick rapid fire, and it will be rapid fire, guys. One quick question. I just want you to pull out your phones. Now, you have a choice to choose this last rapid fire question for this panel. So here, we've enjoyed many great insights around talking about accelerated growth, but here is what we want to kind of lean on each of you for. So peeling back a little bit on a personal level, which of these 5 questions would you like to have answered by these 3 panelists? What keeps you out at night because you're so excited to work on it the next morning? What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given? Now, this is rapid fire, so you're going to keep it short, okay? How do you want to be remembered? That's your 3rd choice audience. Or do you want them to answer the question, if you were stranded on a desert island with only 3 possessions, what would they be? And if you could sit down for a coffee with anyone who ever lived, present or past, alive or dead, that's a lot of options, who would it be and why? Okay, so really quickly vote, and we're going to do a quick rapid fire and then wrap up. So let's see here. All right, well, the popular choice is number 2. So what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given? So you guys have been so inspirational, they want more. Best piece of advice, really rapid fire. Rob, do you want to kick it off?
Oh, I've already said what it is, and it's just spill the milk. I mean, don't take chances in your career, in the company you're at, and do it to learn.
My dad gave me advice. It was mainly because of a girl that I ended up actually marrying, but it was bad advice from his part. But he basically gave me advice not to encumber yourself. So you can guess what that was about. But I would say that also comes to the mind, and so it's every element of your. So don't ever put yourself in a position where you close out ideas or thoughts or anything from the equation. Always be open-minded to the things that you need to be thinking about. So.
Yeah, and mine would be, start now and fix later. I think that all of my greatest innovations have come from hundreds of little iterations that have only happened because you get started when the path isn't clear and kind of figure it out.
I love it. Start now, fix later. Yeah. And on that note, I knew it was going to be fantastic, but just having you up here and just listening to what you said, we're just so grateful that you could spend the time with us. And as a token of our appreciation, we'd like to make a donation to a charity of your choice. So thank you very much for that. And I know there's a lot of people in this room right now that are thinking about accelerating their growth. So I just encourage you, if you haven't yet, or on the break, please do go see the Growth Navigator on the far right-hand side. It is a fantastic way of you looking at your business and how you can accelerate growth with your individual industries. So thank you once again to this panel, Michelle, Sam, and Rob, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.